Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. At least it's afternoon somewhere, like Nairobi, because today we are going to look at the links between water and climate and the issue of adaptation. As you know, it has always been very difficult to get the water issue on the climate debate. In fact, it took more than 10 years of constant struggle because the focus was always on greenhouse gases and their impact on warming. But the greater issue is what we do on climate change. And almost every single effort to create resilience, to adapt to climate change, acts through the water cycle, through the hydrological cycle. And at the same time, we have significant environmental degradation, particularly in the developing countries. And this either led to or was involved very much in diseases such as the COVID-19 and very significant biodiversity losses, some of which are irreversible. And therefore, we must think not only about drinking water, but we must think about water resources and its impact on the entire biosphere. Today, we are going to look at case studies and insights from initiatives that have been addressing the issues and the links between water and climate. So to start us off, I'll give an overview of work we have done addressing or identifying factors that link Egypt's water security to climate change adaptation, and we see how this pans out to the rest of the continent, particularly in the Nile River Basin. So, in terms of background, one of the most critical issues we have, especially in Africa, is very rapid population growth. As you can see, Africa's prospects are the prospect for population growth in Africa, just slips off the graph. In the next few years, we are going to be almost 4 billion people, and more than 1 billion of them will be young people, as the rest of the world has reached like a cusp and is actually on the decline. So Africa's population will be growing. This is significant because if you look at Egypt, for instance, the population in 1805, when most of the land titling system was created, was 4 million people. There is more than 110 million people. And you have similar growth in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in Sudan, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Uganda, in Nigeria, and even in very dry countries like Niger. And the second is urbanization, where city residents' diet is 3 to 4 times more water intense than that of the rural population. And in Egypt's particular case, the whole population is clustered on just 3% of the land, and they're just 20 kilometers on either side of the Nile and along the delta. In terms of the context of water and climate change, Egypt is particularly vulnerable. This is because the Nile River supplies 97% of Egypt's water of about 55 billion cubic meters. The groundwater aquifers provide another 2%, sporadic rainfall another about 1.3 billion cubic meters, and Egypt is investing in desalination, but still the amount is very small, just 0.35 billion cubic meters. So you have a total of about just below 60 billion cubic meters for the entire population. And the current water needs are double the amount that is available, about 100 billion cubic meters and growing. The use and reuse of agricultural drainage and treated wastewater by Egypt adds an additional 21 billion cubic meters to bridge the shortfall. So in terms of technical efficiency, it might not be so perfect, but in terms of resource utilization efficiency, it's among the highest in the world. At the same time, Egypt is extremely vulnerable to climate change due to dense population and dependence on this single source of the River Nile. At the same time, sea level rise is expected of up to 1 meter long, up to 1 meter high along the delta. And this is the delta that provides more than 60% of Egypt's food. We expect that by 2030, food production in the delta will reduce by up to 30%. At the same time, significant saltwater intrusion and flooding of infrastructure will further devastate this very rich delta region of Egypt. But it is not the only area that is facing the adverse impacts of climate change. Temperature rise is a hazard multiplier, and across Egypt is expected to increase by between 1.8 and 5.7% and 5.7 degrees Celsius by the 2080s. So as the rest of the globe looks to cap temperature rise at 1.5%, in Egypt it's going to be more than 3 to 4 times higher. Heat waves are expected to increase in severity, in frequency, and duration by between 9 days a year to 77 days a year. And at the same time, the meager rainfall, the annual precipitation, which I've been informed by experts here is about 20 millimeters, is expected to decrease. Yet at the same time, the flash floods are expected to increase, and these flash floods threaten 1.1 million people by 2080. Most of the information we have here is collated from the climate risk profile for Egypt. And this creates vulnerability, and the key sectors include agriculture, health, the coastal zone, and the human settlements. And in particular, the decreased water for agriculture will affect more than 25% of the labor force. And this is on top of the COVID-19 and other global crises, such as the ongoing war. So we then looked at how is Egypt prepared? What instruments does it have? What are the policies and plans which are in place? And how do they address the dual challenges of climate change and water insecurity? So we have thoroughly analyzed all the documents, and this is what we find. The latest document we looked at was Egypt's first updated nationally determined contribution, which was released just a few months ago. And we also looked at the National Climate Change Strategy, which was released a year earlier in 2021. And we also looked at the first nationally determined contribution, the third national communication, the Climate Change Adaptation Strategy of 2011, National Strategy for Adaptation to Climate Change and Disaster Risk Reduction, the Egypt National Environmental, Economic and Development Study for Climate Change, and the Egyptian National Action Plan to combat desertification. So we wanted to make sure that we are not missing any of the plans and proposals and identified strategies that have been made over the last 15 years. The reason for this is that if climate action is to be effective, the role of water must be reorganized through strategic and dynamic trade-offs. We must look at the trade-offs between clean water and sanitation for the population, energy for economic development, urbanization, and agriculture. What are their demands for water? And so we have applied a tool called the Water Tracker, which we started off with, which is critical because it is critical to be talking about water in the context of national climate plans. So we scrutinize the climate plans and see how do they address or how do they miss to address the water issue. And this is because both mitigation and adaptation actions require water as an input, but it is often left out of plans and other climate instruments. It's somehow forgotten. It's invisible. The tracker helps to identify how water is included or omitted and to evaluate the trade-offs, and provides guidance to strengthen the water-sensitive adaptation commitments. And then it looks to connect multi-sector water resilience projects to climate finance and to lead to a new generation of credible, ambitious, and effective climate planning instruments. So the 4 questions that the water tracker asks is, how is water addressed in the national climate plans, the ones that I have mentioned before? And how is it also addressed in national planning and governance? Because it's one thing to have a climate plan, agricultural plan, energy plan, and so on. But if these are not incorporated in the forward framework, economic planning, then it becomes very difficult to budget for them. And then we look at water and climate connections to specific sectors, as I mentioned, energy, urbanization, agriculture, and so on. And finally, to look at climate financing and how the projects can be implemented. So we've screened all those different documents with these 4 questions in mind. We have a quite extensive response, and I'm just going to give you an overview of what we found. So, in terms of application, we identified areas where Egypt is demonstrating leadership and innovation in climate planning. We looked at water-related impacts and how well they are understood and documented in the climate instruments, including, as I mentioned, the National Climate Change Strategy, the National Water Resources Plan, and others. And we found in terms of governance that at the apex, the National Council for Climate Change serves as the institutional mechanism for coordinating implementation of climate policies and plans, and that it includes members from different relevant ministries. We found that water resources management and adaptive planning for the River Nile particularly are well advanced, and they promote locally led solutions for climate adaptation. This is very important because we tend to have blanket national plans, and when it comes to specific application, that is lacking. So this is a big plus in terms of Egypt's preparation. But we also find that there are numerous opportunities to enhance climate planning frameworks and to improve the coordination between national and subnational actions for water resilience. We also found that the institutional structure for climate planning could be enhanced by engaging climate focal points from the other sector ministries to ensure a more comprehensive inventory of data collection and also of tracking climate resilience actions. We found that there is need for a well-coordinated multi-sector capacity building approach that includes the most at-risk sectors. And it is necessary that we not only think from a water perspective, but to ensure that there is a shared understanding of water resilience by the other sectors, and to lay a groundwork for effective implementation of climate plans and policies. We found that capacity building for decision-making under conditions of uncertainty is crucial. Unfortunately, we are used to very linear planning and thinking. We have to change that mindset. And there is need to acknowledge gaps in the existing data. We also found that additional clarity is recommended to ensure linkages between the National Climate Change Strategy and the financing streams, for instance, and to track financial allocations and expenditures on climate action. Maybe some of these actions have already been undertaken, or maybe they're underway, but they were not reflected in the documents that we had. So in terms of the next steps, we find that the report on Egypt's water tracker provides useful learning materials and insights which are relevant for other water-scarce countries in Africa and the Middle East. And it's expected that we shall work to develop an action plan to prioritize activities in response to the findings and to prioritize opportunities identified as key areas for enhancing climate planning instruments to support increased water resilience in Egypt. So I've also given reference in case somebody wants further information. So I will now invite Dr. Mohammed Ahmed, who will give us a perspective on one of the most one of the most important areas on climate change in Egypt. And he's currently the executive project manager of the GCF UNDP Enhancing Climate Change Adaptation in the North Coast and Nile Delta regions. And he also completed recently a GEF UNDP Adaptation to Climate Change in Nile Delta through Integrated Coastal Management Zone project in 2018. So welcome, Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, and thanks for coming for this session. I'm going to present today a couple of projects that one of them was completed and the other one is ongoing, to present the Egyptian experience in how to adapt to climate change in the coastal zone. I mean, in Egypt here, we have long coasts along the Mediterranean and also the Red Sea. The coasts in Egypt are like 3,000 kilometers long. The work that I'm going to present today focuses on the Mediterranean coast, and the Mediterranean coast includes the Nile Delta, which Simon explained that it's quite important to Egypt and also vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. In the coastal area, sea level rise is probably the most important threat, and it could cause flooding to lowland areas and also saltwater intrusion. So in Egypt, we faced a number of unprecedented events in the last 10, 12 years. This photo is in Alexandria in 2010. There was an extraordinary storm in Alexandria, and it flooded lots of areas in Alexandria, including this important and well-known place. This was an alert in 2010 to the Egyptian government, and but there were still some doubts about climate change and whether this will be coming again or not. And we have been hit by different and a number of storms in the last 12 years. These photos are in Gamasa, where streets were flooded and the power towers collapsed. And then we were hit again in the Nile Delta by other storms, where we have seen things we are not familiar at all with in Egypt. People going back home on floats, and cars are completely flooded. And that's why the Egyptian government started 10 years ago this project, Adaptation to Climate Change in the Nile Delta through Integrated Coastal Zone Management. In this project, we faced a dilemma. First of all, we've got sea level rising. Sea level rising could be flooding the lowland in the Nile Delta, and also it penetrates into the groundwater, raising the salinity and reducing the productivity of the agricultural land. We need to protect a long coast in the Nile Delta. The Nile Delta coast, the Nile Delta coast is like 250 kilometer, and it's hard to protect this with the conventional ways of protection, concrete walls, rocks, and also the uncertainty that is related to climate change. So through this project, we started looking at nature-based solutions and how we could use nature-based solutions to adapt to climate change. So our work in that project focused on the Nile Delta, in Kafr al-Sheikh Governorate in the Nile Delta, which is one of the lowlands in the Nile Delta and surrounded by the Mediterranean and the Lake Borollos. We had 2 pilot sites. In those 2 pilot sites, we experimented with nature-based solutions. And this was the first ever time that nature-based solutions are used here in Egypt to protect areas in the coastal area. So in the first area, it was in the middle of the strip between the Lake Borollos and the Mediterranean, where this arrow, and the other one was next to it in an area called Motobos. So I'm going to show you now the different techniques that we experimented with in the first area. In this first area, we had like an area was 1 kilometer long, and we tried 3 different techniques. Two of them was wholly nature-based, and one of them was like a full-back option, which I'm going to describe now. So the first one, this one in the middle, was like 250 meter long, and it came from an idea from the local community. So basically, we went to the areas where floods are occurring every year, and we spoke to the people there, and we asked them, the local people there, and we asked them, look, you are flooded every year, even now, and with climate change, things will be even worse. So what do you do now? And they just told us this brilliant idea of using reeds or sand fences, and those sand fences work naturally. So basically, the wind blows the sand, and by adding, can you see the cursor? By adding this, by adding this vertical wall, it's from the local reeds that is in the area. It stops the sand that is blown by the wind, and it accumulates a small dune. And then you could add another one, and it forms another one, another dune, and you can add those. And this is what the local people actually do to protect their properties and their land. And it looks pretty in the slide, but I mean, our challenge was actually to see whether this works on the ground or not. And this is what we started in 2015. And as you can see here, those are the fences or the reeds built across the coast. And this photo is a couple of months after construction. And as you can see, you can start seeing the accumulation of sand with time after a couple of months. And this one is also after a couple of months from another view. And then this photo is after 6 months, of construction. And as you can see now, the sand is accumulating at higher rates and volume, seaside and also land side. This photo shows the first row, almost buried under the sand. And we started also the construction of the second row. And this photo was actually after a high storm in 2018. And you can see that the land is still wet here, but I mean, the structure was intact, and there was no problem or no construction problems then, or no failures, which was encouraging. And we added then the second row. This photo shows the overlap between the sand in the first row and the second row. And this is how it develops with time. And this photo is like 3-4 years after construction at the sunset. And as you can see, the area between the two rows was filled, and actually it did work for us on the ground. So this was quite encouraging that those processes can work on the ground and can be used. And what I can say is that the cost of those nature-based solutions are like 10% of any other conventional structure. So we are talking about a structure that uses the nature processes and also at a low cost. So this was the first option that we looked at. We looked at other options as well of using local material and vegetation. This is the land without a structure. We used fill material that is dredged from the Lake Porollos, the nearby Lake Porollos. This was covered with sand from the area, and then we added vegetation. We vegetated the whole dike, and to protect the whole dike and the plants as well, the native plants that we vegetated, we built this in sand fences. So this was the structure after construction, and those boxes were for the vegetation, and we used 8 species for this structure. And these are the photos of the structure, this one. And as you can see, you can still see the plants, but the accumulation of sand was much, much quicker than the growth of the plants, the native plants. This is a photo of one plant. But as you can see here, we were standing on the top of the structure. The structure gained 1 meter on the top of its original designed level, and the accumulation of sand was much quicker than the growth of the material. So the conclusion we got from those two experiments that we could actually use the sand fences to fix the structure that we construct. The sand fences will play naturally a role in raising and extending this structure, so we could deal with the uncertainty of climate change naturally, because our structure is a living structure. It lives and grows with time using the sand fences. It's also low cost and based on the local material and local knowledge. So it was brilliant solution coming from the area based on the local material and local knowledge. Third option, I'm not going to talk a lot about this option, but because we were trialing at this time nature-based solutions, so we needed to have like a fallback option if the nature-based solutions or the purely nature-based solutions didn't work. So it was built from like a geotube filled with fill material, covered with the sand, and then covered with rock. This was also successful, but it's more expensive and it uses rocks, which we wanted as much as we can to avoid. So based on the success of this experiment, we extended the pilot to another area covering 5 kilometers to make sure that if we upscale the nature-based solution, it also works. So we had another experiment for 5 kilometers with fill material, covered again with sand, but only have sand fences. And the experiment, the idea of this experiment is that we check that this works, and also it could grow with time with sand that's blown by the wind. And this is the structure after construction, and you can see the reeds, the sand fences. This is from the land side, and this is the top of the structure. And surprise, surprise, look at this, all filled with sand, naturally, in 4 years. This photo was 4 years after construction. You can hardly see the fences, and the structure grown, it was raised and also widened with time. And this is another photo as well, showing the structure. This was actually very encouraging for us. And based on this, we applied for a fund from the Green Climate Fund. And this is a project I'm working on at the moment, enhancing climate change adaptation in the North Coast and Nile Delta. So the objective of the project that's going at the moment is upscale those nature-based solutions to protect the Nile Delta, protect the people who live there, protect their lands, properties, and also the infrastructure and the whole economy that is in the Nile Delta. The second objective is look at the long term, develop an integrated climate resilient management plan for the coastal zone, where we look at the different aspects and try to manage the different interests in a sustainable way. So the first component, we identified five vulnerable areas in the Nile Delta, in Buhaira, Kafr al-Sheikh, Daqahliya, Damyatta, and Bursaid, and you can see them here, blue, yellow, green, brown, and red. And actually, we completed 90% of those structures, so about 63 kilometers were constructed in 4 areas, and we are working only on the last area in Daqahliya. This is the structure, and this is in the storm in 2020, and you can see the water is building. And now this is at the peak of the storm. The structure was able to stop the water from flooding the area behind. The project also created jobs for the local community, including women. Women helped us a lot in the area, crafting those sand fences. The second component, and I've got probably 1 minute to cover that, is the development of integrated coastal zone management plan for the whole north coast of Egypt. And very briefly, we would like to move from this picture where people work in their own boxes, their own organization, with their own interests, to work in one box, looking at the different concerns, different interests of different people, so we can manage things in a sustainable way. The study will cover the whole north coast of Egypt. It's like 1 kilometers long, 1,000 kilometers long. So it's a unique study that is the first time ever that the whole north coast of Egypt is studied in one project. We will be looking at creating enabling environment, having reliable tools and accurate data and qualified staff to help in the management of the coastal zone through looking at the different regulatory and institutional framework, developing modeling and GIS tools, and establishing monitoring and early warning system, and also capacity building for staff in the government. So I'm going to finish, Simon. So to sum up, I think Egypt made very good steps to adapt to climate change. More will be coming through the integrated coastal zone management plan. I think local knowledge was really, really important in what we did, and also teamwork. What I presented today is the teamwork of so many people, local people, researchers, and engineers. Thank you very much. This is my email. Please send me an email if you would like to know more information. Thanks a lot. Thanks very much.
Yes. So, thank you very much, Mohammed. I think he has made a very, very powerful point. One, that when you're thinking of climate resilient solutions, you cannot just build one wall. You must think of multiple structures. And then the combination of nature-based solutions with affordable infrastructure is also very necessary. And incorporation of local knowledge and gender perspective and empowerment in projects is something that is really much to be looked at. This is very important because Africa has thousands of kilometers of coastline, all of them facing a very, very similar challenge. You remember Mozambique and the inundation, and quite a number of other places in Kenya, Somalia, and so on. So I think this solution that you have is very relevant, and that's why we think out of this, how can we learn and have an exchange mechanism? Our next speaker is Ijeoma Emanjo, who is a Chief Water Resources Officer at the African Development Bank. And before the African Development Bank, he has been working with the United Nations, with the World Bank, and his speciality is transforming challenges in the natural resources and water sector to fungibility. Because quite often we are told we make noise, we say there are so many problems, but we don't give bankable proposals. So hopefully he'll be able to bridge a little on that and give us perspective on climate resilience for the Sahel region. Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Just want to say greetings from our director, Mr. Chanda, who was supposed to do this, but had to be somewhere else in Africa working. I just wanted to maybe change pace a little bit and talk about the Sahel, which is very close geographically and which is sort of facing very similar challenges to what you're seeing here in sort of the Middle East, North Africa region. So I'll just start by saying basically the Sahel goes from, in terms of, okay, so this is a presentation structure, but quickly to talk about, basically what we're talking about in terms of dimensions of water security, we talk about needs around health, resilient ecosystems, productive economies. And really main drivers of water risks are things like areas like governance, population growth, climate change, land use change, poverty, and then really water security outcomes, things around quality of water, quantity of water, and access. So really access being a sort of issue around scarcity, but the three really looking at issues around stress, water stress. So just talk a little bit about the Sahel. Sahel goes from west to east or east to west. It's about 6,000 kilometers wide, about 3 million kilometers in terms of the entire sort of space. And it really goes from maybe 100 kilometers in terms of width in some areas to thousands of kilometers in other parts of the continent. So rainfall really varies quite a bit in the Sahel, but in the entire Sahel, rainfall is really low annually. So we're looking at about a maximum of about 700 millimeters per annum. And this is from like 2017. So this map is not the entire Sahel, but we put this in because if you look at southern Nigeria, let me see if I can get this to work. If you look at southern Nigeria, which is probably the dark blue part, you'll see that just a small geographical distance, you could see massive differences in sort of rainfall expectations per year. So the Sahel is critical to the bank for many reasons. One being that there's a lot of insecurity in terms of tensions and conflict happening in many parts of the Sahel. So we've made a very conscious effort to do work around sort of improving development outcomes in that area. In terms of extremes, temperature extremes, you'll see that you can have temperature extremes up to 42 degrees Celsius, which is associated with the risk of mortality. And in terms of water insecurity is a big problem, and you can see that the cost to the Sahel region is somewhere between 8 to 12% of GDP. Expected is by 2050. Just more in terms of the Sahel, the region's water supply is unevenly distributed and poorly accessible. In places like Mali, you'll see variations as much as 6,000 meters cubed per person, to other places where you see, like in Burkina Faso, where there's only about 664 meter cubed per inhabitant per year. In places like Eritrea and Burkina Faso, you'll see extreme high water stress and high water stress. And we are making a very big effort at the bank to really look at groundwater availability and access in terms of our work. Just talk a little bit about, for us at the bank, when we talk about water, we don't talk about water supply, we also talk about access to basic sanitation. And then you'll see in terms of millions of people, Nigeria has almost 120 million people without access to basic sanitation, and Ethiopia and so on. So really the issues don't just go towards the traditional rural water supply that we deal with, but also in terms of sanitation, and that being a real problem in the region. In terms of sort of climate and sort of extreme events, we're seeing frequency. If you look at the two maps, you're seeing that we're seeing frequency of events, of climate events, are increasing, and they're more frequent as you move forward in time. Also, the population affected also growing to, I think, the most recent data we had about 100 million people being affected by extreme events. And then you look at the other map on the right, in terms of floods and droughts in the region, you'll see that same trend, more people being affected, and the frequency has been increasing. So climate change really is a big issue in this area. So I want to talk a little bit about the Lake Chad Basin, which is a real focus for us at the bank. We've seen over recent periods, the Lake Chad Basin, for the 20 years up to 2018, really reduced in size. But due to several factors like use, and also they've seen quite an increase in rainfall. You're seeing more, the Lake Chad Basin is getting bigger and becoming more sort of filled up. But there has been a lot of conflict in the area due to different factors, from like war in Cameroon to some terrorist activities in northern Nigeria and northern Cameroon and southern Chad. And so in terms of our strategy, the bank is doing quite a bit in the region. We have a portfolio of about just under $1 billion, about $800 million. Most of it is in Nigeria. We're working along with the Global Center on Adaptation to look at climate risk mitigation, adaptation, risk management planning, and so on. So in terms of investment areas, the three big areas for us are trying to build infrastructure, improve information, and institutions and governance. Just to go through each one of these very quickly, in terms of investment perspectives, water information systems are really important. We're looking at different investments in the region around sort of water resource monitoring, flood forecast, early warning systems, drought early warning systems, and so on. In terms of infrastructure, we're doing a lot. Internally, the bank is we're working with our ag team to do a lot of work in the region, agriculture team, around irrigation, enhancing water productivity for rainfed systems, expanding water storage, and protecting and developing alternative water resources, with groundwater really being a strong focus, and looking at sort of water recycling in urban environments. In terms of policies and institutions, the African Development Bank is very, very big on working with transboundary governance systems, so river basin organizations, working with the regional economic communities, ECOWAS, and so on, to help build sort of benefit sharing and also build cooperation around water resources in the Sahel, but also all over Africa. We're working with multi-level institutions in nationally, subnational, local institutions. And really one of our, I mean, I'm sure most of you know about our high fives at the bank, but regional integration is one of our key high fives, and really making sure that we integrate Africa and sort of help build structures around countries working together to deliver on water security challenges. Also, we're working quite a bit around building capacity at community level, and also in terms of governance, promoting private-public partnerships, arrangements, which we think is really key in terms of developing water resources in the region, and then promoting a sort of equal employment opportunity and gender equality, which is a really big thing for us at the bank. So in terms of conclusions, very quickly, obviously, I hope I've sold the idea that the Sahel region is a water-scarce region and groundwater is key. Scaling up investments is really the biggest part of our strategy, and looking at how these investments we can get best value for the dollar. Improving management and productivity of water resources is key. Monitoring of surface and groundwater resources is also key. Multi-sector programming, looking at the water, food, energy nexus is required, and really working with institutions around sort of cooperation needs to be leveraged. So having these institutions work together, this needs to be leveraged. And really, for us, blended finance is important at the bank, because concessional financing is not enough to solve some of the problems that we're looking at. So that's it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Very important. Now, our next speaker is going to give us a very interesting perspective. One of the big challenges we face in most of our African countries is sectoral competition. In many countries, you find irrigation is always contested between the water ministry and the agriculture ministry. Water services are contested between local governments and national agencies that are responsible for utility management. And this spreads into many other sectors. Energy doesn't want to talk to water, yet in a country like Kenya, 97% of the storage, water storage is actually for hydropower. And they don't want to talk to irrigation at all because that's a competitive use and so on. So Dr. Bishar Iman, who has a degree in civil engineering and a PhD in watershed hydrology, enormous experience in UN organizations with USAID across multiple countries, and particularly in the Middle East and Northern Africa, is going to give us a perspective on how these different sectors can be connected through the NDC. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Well, what I would like to talk about is how to basically connect water across the national determined contribution, which is one of the most powerful tools. Countries have been using in order to adapt to climate change and to also indicate their contribution to the mitigation and to assess their planning for climate change. This particular toolkit we are working on in UNESCO has come out as a result of working for 5 years over an initiative jointly that was led, as a matter of fact, by ESCWA and the League of Arab States concerning the capacity building of Arab climate change negotiators. And UNESCO's role was basically promoting water issues and how to address water issues in the negotiation, particularly as we all know the difficulties that many countries have had with respect to financing adaptation in the water sector, which is going to be most impacted as opposed to financing issues related to mitigation. So there was a need to have the water issue being addressed and also the climate change negotiators to be informed. Then as the work going since 2015, multiple engagement with the negotiators, there was a recognize that there is a need to put some sort of a training that will allow not only climate change negotiators, but people who are responsible to put together those INDC documents, as well as people from the water sectors and other sectors in order to do that. Of course, it's a very long training tool, so I'm not going to do the training. I'm just going to try to give a flavor of the main component of this training, of course, with thanks to our partners and to my colleague, Dr. Ali Karni from the Lebanese University, who has helped significantly in putting together this particular training toolkit. So basically, the training toolkit focuses on 5 modules. The first module introduces water and climate change issues, some technical issues, some relationship between water and climate change, and then the current status of water in INDCs at a global scale and then at regional scale, and whenever is available, also using some existing or updated NDC documents in order to set example and have discussions. And this is going to be a regional training. It could be multi-regional training where people can exchange experiences as they see how water was integrated into each country's NDC document. Then we would look at the how to enhance water in the NDC documents. And then finally, we look at one major approach, which is the water, energy, food nexus. And of course, I'm not going to be able to discuss that due to the time limitation we have for the presentation today. And then finally, address issues of governance, climate finance, and technological innovation in water action in order to ensure that all of these. So the first module starts with a basic introduction of climate change, and then it goes into details of the impact of climate change on various sectors. For example, noticing also it's not just issue of climate change, but also a global change issue, because over time we have had increase in population, resulting in increase in water withdrawal. We had increase in enhancement of lifestyle, which is also resulted in major increase in water demand and all of these issues. Then we go through looking at some of the key challenges that to the water sector resulting from climate change. And of course, I don't want to spend too much time on that because most of us are very clear about these. We have irregular water supply. We have also shift in seasonality, increasing frequency of severe events, and then also the potential impact on water quality and all other risks related to pollution and most of the other risks. Very simple example, as we go through many other examples, of course, through the training. Here is a simple example, for example, on the impact on various crops and various particular major staples, very essential staples for food in terms of food security. Then also we discuss the impact of water on of climate change on disasters, and this is, for example, a regional snapshot for the Arab region in terms of the cost, the percentage of cost that is resulting from effective. Then, given the fact that not everybody in the training, we're trying to have an intersectoral training where we bring people from multiple ministries of planning and all of these other sectors. We also have to introduce people who have not worked on the NDC to what is the NDC, what is the component of the NDC, and all of that, what are the major, I would say, institutional justification for the NDC, the Paris Agreement, and all of these components that need to be discussed. We go into a little bit more details about what are conditional and unconditional contributions for each country, and we give example. For example, as you see, we use Morocco as an example, and of course, all of that will be presented with case studies and examples and discussion. The next step is to go and look at water at the NDCs. So, analysis of many NDCs at the global scale as well as the regional scale have been conducted by many entities, many agencies, as well as by individuals, researchers who look at that in detail. So we go and start looking at the water in the NDC, and this is very interesting. If one says, okay, if I can see that almost a majority of the countries include water in their NDC, so why do I need the training? Why are you telling me about water in NDC if almost every NDC include water in it? The devil is in the details, as they say. Because as you go there, how do you convert that NDC into an actual bankable water project that not only, and you will see that in the next few slides, is not just including it, is making it an action. You can include it as a vision, but at the end of the day, if it is not translated into an action item in the NDC that has certain funding or has certain potential for funding, it's not there. It's there as a goal, as a very ambitious goal, but it's not necessarily there if it cannot be implemented. We go also and see some of the example of action and prioritize action at a global scale. And of course, every time you have a global scale, there is also a regional scale. But if I want to go through regional scales, it will be, my presentation will probably be 2 hours, and I'm trying to avoid that. Here's another example. For example, a very simple regional scale. You can see that we're looking at all the result and the data that came from the various regional commission of the UN, where you can see where is water, a specific item, prioritization of infrastructure and institutional strengthening for water in the NDCs. Many countries, we go again, as I just said a minute ago, details are very important. If you look at water resources and impact of disaster and impact of all of these, you have to also address the gender aspect of that. Because this is part that we have always seen come up as we still need to do gender mainstreaming in water resources management in the project design from the beginning to the end. All the way, from the beginning of the project to the monitoring, evaluation, implementation, discussion, planning, all of these. And this is an important part, as we are going to see, is water really? It's not only water, what other issues that are related to water, such as, for example, gender aspect, particularly in DRR. As a water specialist, I love slides like that, where I can see I can be the center, water can be the center of the world, water can be the center of all the SDGs, but one has to also be realistic to recognize that there are some issues, some SDGs that are very strongly related to water, some issues are indirectly related to water, and if one has to try to map not only the SDGs themselves, but the actual targets within the SDGs, it can be very difficult. Some of the innovative approaches are being used and designed right now, and I think there will be some discussion of that in the COP, in which you try to get the shortest path, where you look at certain targets and you go through these targets in order to optimize the possibility of achieving as much as you can of the SDG. And we all know that the SDG is member states issue. It is owned by the member state. Who decide on what goals, what target, what metrics to be used are member states. But it is interesting to see that it's not only that. Water is also a connector within many of the international agreements and accords that relate to the disaster. For example, the Convention on Biodiversity, the Bonn Challenge goal, the the Sendai disaster risk reduction, and not to mention, of course, the UNFCCC Paris Agreement and what follows on that agreement. So when we look at the SDG and we look at, when we try to work with water, we definitely are working across sector, across many of the SDGs. And that is important to also include and clarify in the NDC. Again, example of one member state that has really put in gender issues at the heart of their water actions for during the NDC is Palestine. They had that very well done, and they had very good strategy for gender mainstreaming, in particular as it goes into the water sector. And of course, that's some of the case studies that will be presented during the training. Wastewater treatment is also a very important part because it is not only an adaptation issue, but also it's a co-benefit issue. Because if you can work on minimizing the energy, enhancing the technology on wastewater treatment, and reusing water, treated wastewater in a more economic way, then you are basically cutting down on energy. When my colleague from the coastal zone protection was presenting his presentation, it immediately occurred to me, when using those natural-based solutions, how much of energy saving happened just because of the saving on the concrete, on the cement that is extremely energy intensive and polluting industry. So by using those nature-based solutions, there is also a co-benefit in there that needs to be calculated and included in the proposal to the Green Climate Fund, in the proposal for all of that. So always one has to look at co-benefit and intersection among sectors when working on that. Groundwater also features very prominently in some of the Arab national development contributions, such as the case in Jordan. However, if we look at the vision and the understanding of how many of the Arab countries are addressing the water issues within their national determined contribution, it is focused on supply. Most of them focus on supply, whether it be it for agricultural sector, whether it be it for the housing sector and or the industry and tourism. There is a lot of work on mobilizing rainwater harvesting as a source to augment water resources. And of course, in many other countries would be desalination. But there is yet a very significant emphasis on demand aspect, managing demand as a source of augmenting resources, relying further on increasing productivity as a source of augmenting resources, and also increasing the utility of treated wastewater as a source of augmented water resources. Yesterday, His Excellency the Minister mentioned something that we no longer look at water, at treated wastewater as something that we need to get rid of. We look at it now as water, as part of what we call the water machine, which is part of the economic cycle in the country and part of the water cycle in the country. So these are paradigms that hopefully we'll see more in the updated NDCs as we go further. These are some of the key actions that need to be included. There is a need for significant investment in the water action plans in the NDC for it to be effective. There is a need for high level of coordination, and this is where a lot of the training will focus on, by bringing in people from different aid entities, energy, agriculture, water, planning, and other entities responsible. And there is a need for establishing a comprehensive monitoring and evaluation system for adaptation. And I think this is not only applying for the Arab region, but also applies to Africa and many other areas where we need to look at adaptation plan and start monitoring, assessing whether our adaptation is working well. And the reason being is that we don't want to get locked in one solution that we thought of in 2015 all the way to 2030. We need to have an adaptive way of addressing solutions. So we need to be able to adapt our solutions, and we need to have some flexibility in order to see if things change. Any action we do on water, on any other issues related to the climate change, will also have consequences. And as these consequences start materializing, we may realize that we need to shift action, modify our action. So we need that type of monitoring and evaluation and assessment comprehensive, so that we can have those adaptive approaches implemented, planned ahead of time, and implemented as we see things change. There has to be need, of course, on renewable energy, and this is an issue that can really impact a co-benefit approach. However, there is a lot of people talk about the need to reallocation of water between agriculture and other things. I would let my colleague from the World Food Programme address how that has to be done in a way that does not impact food security, because this is also an issue that we need to. And that's why whenever we talk about that, we say the water, energy, food, and of course environment nexus should be considered when one is doing that. And we have another training that will be there. And the financing is where the major problem. If we look at the water, all the time water is mentioned. There is a water portfolio. But if you look at the water portfolio, whether it includes a very detailed water project that comes with a budget, that comes with an action that says, in this here we are using infrastructure, in this here we are using nature-based solution, here we are going to use demand cutting, here is our target, specific water target for that particular project, there is very limited amount. So while a water portfolio is there, how can you convert that water portfolio into bankable project? Particularly that most of the countries that need to do on adaptation are lacking funding. And one of the major difficulties for them to implement the water resources plan in the adaptation or even the mitigation is the fact that they don't have funding. I'm very happy to inform every colleagues here is the fact that one of UNESCO Center, which is the regional center for training and water resources here in Egypt, which is part of the training sector of the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation, is working currently with our brothers in ISESCO toward putting together a training on how to write a bankable proposal. Because this is a very important capacity need that is needed in the region here and in Africa. And this is going to be covering many countries, 52 countries at least, hopefully. And then that training, of course, could be then transferred to other countries whereby we can have the water sector and the other connected sector build a bankable proposal that addresses water issues. Of course, there are, again, as I said, about the co-benefits. I don't want to spend too much time on that. In conclusion, of course, we need to have coordinated planning. We need to have a monitoring and evaluation system. We need to bring in all sectors, including energy sector, including housing sector, including the water entities that are related to water. Here in Egypt, for example, water is energy, is basically agriculture, water, housing, and you have also, of course, other ancillary entities that are working. Thank you very much. And I just want to say that the training will take place hopefully in December. We will soon advertise the training and send announcement to the member states. And later on, it will be available on UNESCO Learning website where anybody can take that training, self-paced training. Thank you very much.
Yes, excellent. I think next time we'll ask for a full day because there is so much to learn from these sessions. And I think it's only fitting that our next speaker is the only woman on the panel, and she is the human face to this water scarcity and climate resilience issue. She's an ultra-marathoner, runs 200 marathons a year. I'm a Kenyan, and you know we are world champions, but I'm shocked by it. Yeah, pleasantly surprised by this. And then, but she's not only a marathoner, she has a solid background, law, finance, and she's also worked on climate change for quite a number of years. And so she runs for blue, runs for water. So welcome, Mina.
Thanks, Simon. Before I start, I just want to pick up on something that Dr. Imam mentioned, which is that solving this global water crisis is going to require an awful lot more than creating lofty goals. Solving this water crisis is going to require action. 5 years ago, I ran down the Nile River. I was blown away by the fertile fields, the irrigation canals, and the communities that were so dependent on the water from their river, from their food, for their businesses, and for their livelihoods. I ran past trucks and trains which were belching fumes, their carriages full of sugarcane on their way to be processed. And I met farmers like Mohammed, who talked to me about their fears for the future supply of water from the river, fear that the construction of the Renaissance Dam would impact the water they rely on, and fear about the impact of the ever-increasing and very real threat of climate change. These fears and worries aren't driven by reports or by statistics on a page. They're driven by the real changes these farmers are witnessing firsthand. Changes to their rivers, their crops, and the land that are essential to their livelihoods and their lives. Not just their lives, but our lives too. We are all dependent on water. It's the foundation of our societies and our economies. It goes into everything we use, we build, we eat, and we consume. Every single day. The food each of us ate this morning, The power and the lights we're sitting under, the clothes that we're all wearing, took water to grow, produce, manufacture, and deliver. Just to put this into context, the amount of water that went into making the clothes each one of us is wearing right now is more water than all the water we drink or will drink before turning 40 years old. Now, pause for a moment and just consider how many outfits you, your friends, your family have at home, and how many Mohammeds have helped to grow the cotton and fibers that went into making them, or the sugar that went into your coffee. And it's not just about clothing and food. Most of us were lucky enough to wake up this morning and turn on the tap to shower, flush the toilet, and brush our teeth. And when we did, we probably didn't give it a second thought, even though we all came here to talk about it. Just like the water that went into our food, our clothes, and our power, we take the water in our taps for granted. But the fibers in our clothes don't come from stores, and our water doesn't come from the taps, pipes, or treatment plants. The water needed for all of this comes from healthy ecosystems, from rivers like the Nile, and from our lakes and our wetlands. And these ecosystems are being degraded and destroyed. We've lost a third of the world's wetlands in my lifetime, and we're continuing to lose them 3 times faster than our forests. I know this because I've seen it. Over the last few years, I've run thousands of kilometres across some of the most harshest places on the planet, deserts like Antarctica and the Atacama, great rivers like the Nile and the Amazon, the Yangtze and the Amu Darya in Central Asia. I've run through threatened wetlands in Australia and Zambia and to shrinking glaciers high up in the mountains of Europe and Tajikistan. I run to raise awareness of the water crisis, to show the urgency of the problem that we're facing, and to drive action. Action from governments, from companies, and from people like all of us right here in this room. Along my journey, I've met thousands of people just like Mohammed, who've shared their water stories. Farmers, factory workers, politicians, mums, dads, and kids, women and girls in places like Malawi and India who are risking their lives each day to fetch water for their families. Herders in Kenya who've dug wells so deep into the ground they need a human daisy chain to pass buckets up to the surface to feed their animals. Communities in Turkey who navigate around the massive sinkholes that have opened up in the ground as a result of the over-withdrawal of groundwater. And young farmers in South Africa who were so despairing of the lack of rain that they told me, "What hope do I have? To pray for rain or to leave my farm?" And business leaders who are finally waking up to the worsening water risks to the future of their companies. For years we've seen the signs. We've heard from scientists that the impacts of climate change would be felt through water. If climate change is a shark, they say, water is its teeth. It's the place we'll be bitten first. But we've continued to ignore that advice with devastating consequences, not only for the environment, but for societies and economies right around the world. In Uzbekistan, I ran across the Aral Sea, and it was heartbreaking to see the death of a mighty river like the Amu Darya, to run past the carcasses of fishing boats lying stranded in the desert sands, to meet communities struggling to rebuild, and to listen to far too many questions about why, despite all the signs, we failed to act. These are questions I've heard too often. Lake Urmia in Iran, the Salt Lake in the United States, and Lake Tuz in Turkey, which I ran across just a few weeks ago. And this isn't just an Africa or a Central Asia problem. It's a problem right across our fragile planet. Over the last few weeks, I've been running through Europe and along some of the major rivers used for transport, agriculture and tourism. The Rhine, the Danube, the Loire. Rivers so low I could walk under their bridges, where cruise boats have been replaced by buses, and where barges offload their products because they can no longer navigate the waterways with a full load of cargo. When we were there, the rains came. But like in so many places, they're too little, too late. It's easy for us to think that this water crisis is someone else's problem. But the truth is, with global supply chains and an interconnected world, water is everybody's business. Not only our business, our economies, our communities, our societies, water is our life. Water is everything. But for too long, we've treated it as if it's nothing. That needs to change. Thanks to the government and the leadership of Egypt, we have an opportunity 3 weeks from now at Cwp2022 to put water at the heart of climate action and to help push water up the global agenda, setting the framework for success at the UN Water Summit in 2023, co-hosted by the Netherlands and Tajikistan. These are two catalytic moments for water and two opportunities for the world to come together, not only to talk, but to act. But to act, first we need to listen to scientists and experts, to the farmers like Mohammed, and to the millions of people around the world on the front lines of this water crisis who are battling historic floods and droughts, changing rainfall patterns and river flows, and who are relying on all of you, all of us, to take the action they need to solve this global water crisis. This is not an easy conversation, nor is it an easy path forward, but it's real and it's needed. As one of the local guides said to me as we were climbing up to the glaciers in Tajikistan, Mina, please tell these people directly, look around you. The time for soft language is over. We need real action, and we need it now. He's not alone. Over the last few years, we have grown a grassroots movement for change. Thousands and thousands of people in over 197 countries and territories around the world literally stepping up for water, sharing their stories, and helping to move water from the sidelines to the front line. 2 days ago, I ran marathon number 113 out of the 200 marathons I've committed to run this year as part of the Global Run Blue campaign in the lead up to the UN 2023 summit. Just to put that in perspective, that's 4 marathons a week, every week for 1 year. I've run through cities, farmlands and forests. I've run past rivers, lakes and wetlands. I've run on 6 continents and in 32 countries. Frankly, just saying it sounds pretty surreal. Even more so because I'm neither naturally talented at running, nor do I enjoy running extremely long distances in incredibly challenging environments. And to be really honest with you, it's one of the hardest things I have ever done. But big goals need us to be prepared to do hard things, like running ridiculous numbers of marathons in some of the most extreme places on the planet, or taking concrete action on water. So here is my challenge to all of you here in this room. We have an opportunity at Cwp2022 and the UN Summit in 2023 to step up to the water challenge, to reach across traditional boundaries, to turn away from failing past practices and vested interests, and to make concrete commitments that change the lives of millions. Invest in the infrastructure needed to provide everyone with clean water and sanitation. Reach across traditional boundaries and strengthen collaboration with neighbouring countries to protect and enhance our shared river basins that are the lifeblood of our societies and our economies. Stop turning a blind eye to water and instead assess our water risks and implement strategies to reduce them. And support communities and businesses to build resilience in the face of our glowing climate and water crisis. Too little, too much, too dirty, too hot. We must all use this unprecedented opportunity to do more than make vague promises to accelerate progress or blue-washing pledges to act on water. We must use this opportunity to act and to be held accountable for acting. Because while individually you can make a difference, together we truly can change the world. This is our moment. Let's make it count. Thank you very much.
Yes, I'm sure if there's one person you'll not forget from this conference, it's Mina. And next time you see her at the marathon, I'm sure she'll be running in Sharm el-Sheikh for those of you who are lucky enough to go there. Many countries, especially in the Nile Basin, are facing catastrophic drought. In Eastern Africa, between Sudan, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia, 52 million people are facing starvation. This is the worst in 40 years, and it's soon becoming the worst in 50 years because there is another failed season ahead of us. To address this issue, hopefully, Mr. Praveen Agrawal, who works with the World Food Programme and who has a long and illustrious career across Philippines, North Korea, Colombia, and in many other countries, and also worked with IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, will give us a perspective on water and food security, the inextricable link. Welcome.
Good afternoon, and it's always a little bit difficult when food security begins at home, and it's getting close to that time. But good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. Allow me to begin with a reflection and a quote from Ban Ki-moon, former Secretary General of the United Nations. Saving our planet, lifting people out of poverty, advancing economic growth, these are one and the same fight. We must connect the dots between climate change, water scarcity, energy shortages, global health, food security, and women empowerment. Solutions to one problem must be solutions for all. We have to walk away from a linear thinking. This needs to be looking at the bigger picture and how do we connect the dots. What is the cost of our inaction? Or at best, to continue doing what we are doing? The cost of annual humanitarian response required if global temperatures increase by an additional 1% from the current levels is a whopping $1 trillion. I'm not even sure what that means. How many of us really know what $1 trillion is? That figure is so astronomical, is so big, it's totally incomprehensible. So it becomes more than one factor, and it's no longer about just production or access or consumption. The effects are not focalized to one specific area or field, but it is painfully evident that they cover the entire spectrum and it's all interrelated. as mentioned by Ban Ki-moon. Over the last decade, people affected by extreme weather and climate-related disasters were approximately 1.7 billion people. What we have today is accelerating, and it's accelerating in our time, real time. I think all the panelists before me have highlighted how fast that's moving and how quickly that's moving if we don't take action. We have to move from words to action. The number of disasters is increasing exponentially, and it's estimated by 2030 we will have more than 560 disasters per year. That's an incredible number. That's 1.5 disasters per day. Per day. At present, 4 billion people, equivalent to almost 2/3 of the world's population, are experiencing severe water scarcity for at least 1 month a year. Egypt's annual share of water is 560 metric meters per person. According to FAO, when annual water supplies drop from 1,000 to 500 per person, the population faces stress. Egypt's overall annual share, and we heard that at the very opening, amounts to 60 billion cubic meters, while the country needs almost the double. So we're already at a deficit by 50%. With the current crisis that we've had over the last couple of years, people have become more food insecure. What is today an issue of affordability will tomorrow be a problem of availability. And we have not even added the dimension of climate change or water scarcity. Without water security, there can be no food security. Water scarcity and the loss of arable land limits the production of sufficient amounts of food, thus no longer a question of affordability. You simply will not have it available. That means the capacity to feed ourselves. Here in Egypt, the agricultural sector lies almost completely dependent upon irrigation from the Nile. The Nile accounts for 97% of both Nile and the groundwater sources, with 85% of that going to agriculture. So we're not even looking at the water from the taps that we were talking about earlier. 85% of that water is going to agriculture. This is, and I think we heard it several times this morning, a call to action. And that action is now. We must do our part. This is a crisis like no other. It's not related to one region, one country, one district, or one village, or one run. You've run the world, and you've seen it everywhere. But it's not all dull and gloom. There are actions that can be taken. We need to find solutions that are replicable, scalable, and sustainable. At WFP, we're concentrating on climate-focused innovation that is the focus of our innovation accelerator based in Munich, Germany. It's imperative we continue to identify, support, and scale innovative solutions that target climate emergency, climate adaptation, and resilience building. This requires moving and using technology to reach the very areas that are more affected. We need smart agriculture. We need smart irrigation. By harnessing the power of digitalization and innovation, we can assist in reducing the impact and buy time to find more effective and efficient ways to use and reuse water. Reuse water. Such that we can address the basic building blocks that is food security at the household level. We need to find a solution that are based in science, that have a multiplying effect. Time is against us, so in order to gain time, this has to be inclusive, and you heard that today. We need to bring the youth. We need to bring the startups. We need to bring the private sector. We need to bring academia. We need to bring everyone, in addition to governments being always held accountable. It's everybody's job. We need to act now with technologies that are green and reduce emissions. If we do not find ways to reduce emissions, by the end of the century, 30% of global food production will be at risk. To address this, WFP and the ministry here have been established in early weather warning systems that can help farmers prepare land, look at what the outlook, how best to use the resources they have, how best to use water and water management well before the problem arises. Taking it a little further, WFP is working with entities to promote remote sensing and artificial intelligence technologies using geographic information systems to monitor and present real-time data to support climate-informed decision-making, all of which will assist in better management and care of water resources. Hopefully, this will lead to anticipatory action and forecast-based financing. So when we're looking for money, we're not looking for money now, we're looking to use money now that will anticipate these problems as they arise. Okay. In agriculture, this translates into smart technologies that replace current ones, such as solar panels, to generate electricity, to power water pumps, smart irrigation, adopting technologies that reduce the use of water, or better said, increase the efficiency of water. These water-saving techniques, we have seen at WFP a reduction in the loss of water by 55%, a reduction in fuel consumption by 50%, and a 70% reduction in canal maintenance. So we need to replicate and take it to scale. Let me just quickly jump through this. I just want to say that at the World Food Program, we've worked all over Egypt, starting from Aswan all the way to Alexandria, from the Libyan all the way to the Red Sea, assisting more than 350,000 farmers looking at how to address this issue in an integrated way that will address not only farming, but education, health, and all the others that are directly associated. And last month, WFP and the Ministry of International Cooperation held a food security symposium, which involved everybody. And it was amazing to see how many solutions are out there, how much technology is out there. We just need to use it, scale it, and bring it to bear. Let me conclude by one program that the WFP is doing, and that's called H2Grow, which is a model that uses up to an affordable hydroponic solution that uses up to 90% less water and requires 70% less space. Yeah, this is relatively simple, low cost, low tech solutions, and is enabling communities in some of the most arid parts of the country to grow fresh vegetables and animal feed. So while the challenges can be daunting, the solutions can be equally inspiring and far-reaching. We can make a difference and change lives. Let me just say, as a final thing, that it is within our collective power to do something. We must recognize that it is beyond the scope of any individual country or sector or agency, therefore cannot be addressed as an isolation. We need to work on this together. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Praveen. And last but not least, we have a presentation from Mr. Tahir Mohammed Al-Momani, who is going to give us experiences from Jordan. He's a hydrogeologist with a lot of experience in groundwater, which is one of the key issues for the future. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Simon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Tahir Momani from Jordan. I will just, in the beginning, I will, for the people that didn't know about Jordan and situation in Jordan regarding water, I will give you an introduction about our situation, and after that, the adaptation to climate change. The Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, it's around, the population around 11 million. The capital is Amman. Average rainfall precipitation around 8,200 million cubic meter. Available fresh water less than 100 cubic meter per person for all uses. Jordan, it's we have Jordan Valley near the Dead Sea. The amount of the rainfall between 100 to 300 millimeter. The highland from between 400 and 600 millimeter, and the Badia or desert area, it's between 50 to 200 millimeter per year. Compare of the, actually the climate change is start happening in Jordan from 2-3 years ago. The last year amount compared to the long-term average amount of precipitation less than 40%. Yeah, you can see here the amount of rainfall on all Jordan is around 5,000 compared to 8,200 in long-term average, and it's, you can see it's less than 3,000 actually, and the rainfall distribution is complicated and variation from area to area, and we have some drought or some less than the half of amount of rainwater in some area. Our water resources in Jordan is it's the mainly groundwater, renewable and non-renewable groundwater, surface water, flood springs and wadis, and non-conventional water resources, saline water, treated wastewater, and seawater desalination, which will start it soon. Especially desalination, it's the only solution in the future in Jordan. Groundwater, we have around 12 groundwater distributed in all Jordan, and we reach the safety yield. We increase in some basin over abstraction more than 50,000 or 25,000 million cubic meter over than the safe yield. And this is cause a drawdown in all groundwater basin in Jordan. And this is actually, we start facing problem in some area regarding the groundwater and increase salinity in some groundwater basin. Surface water, we have 15 surface water. Most of the surface water, it's also sharing with neighboring country. And we have a problem in some area, like the biggest dam between Jordan and Syria, it's still empty and there is no water. In addition to that, because the decreased amount of precipitation, the storage in the dam is around 60% from the total amount of the capacity. Water used by sector, around 50% in agriculture, domestic and tourism around also 48%, and industry 3% in all Jordan. Water resources, surface water, around 307 million cubic meter from the surface water. Groundwater, 618 million cubic meter, and the sea field is 275 million cubic meter. And you can see how much we are abstract from the groundwater in Jordan. A treated wastewater around 167 million cubic meter, and actually we use all this water in the agriculture, in fodder and around on farm around the wastewater treatment plant. You can see it's regarding water use from 2010 until 2021, increase after 2013 after the Syrian refugees, and it's the high increase on the demand and increase in supply for the domestic sector in Jordan, more than 100 million cubic meter per year. Climate change is considered one of the most important current and future challenge of the water sector. The effect of climate change on the water sector in Jordan, rise of the average temperature and an increase in the intensity of heat wave, leading to increase in evaporation, which would lead to an increase in demand in agriculture, demand of water in the agriculture sector by about 18%. And this is, it's a challenge in the future for the agriculture also. Decrease in rainfall leading to lack of recharge for surface and the groundwater resources. And in last 2 years, it's around 20% less than the long-term average in Jordan. Accordingly, the Ministry of Water and Irrigation developed the climate change policy for a resilience water sector in 2016. This picture shows because the climate change challenges increase the temperature 15%, and the precipitation will be less 15%. Demand for agriculture will be about 18%, and this is all of these with the low water and the degradation of the groundwater and less precipitation. It will cause us a challenge for the future and need a solution to find out how we can deal with the climate change and the shortage of the water resources in Jordan. This is the just a picture this year. It's Al Mujib Dam. This dam used for domestic use, and it is empty. And this is the first year we see this picture from 20 years ago until now, and it's a problem. And because of that, now we start to dig a lot of groundwater wells around the dam to supply the people around these dams and in South Jordan. Adaptation to climate change in the water sector. As you see, we start the climate change resilience policy in 2016, and now in the SDG implementation, climate adaptation, to find a solution for the water sector in the future, and to save water for agriculture and domestic uses. Adaptation to climate change in the water sector, new water, non-conventional water, water harvesting, including rooftop, micro and macro catchment, wastewater collection, treatment, and in this, this is a book, it will published soon. We calculate all the rainfall in Jordan for each city, and from this, it will, we encourage people to collect water from the roof, water harvesting under the ground, and use it in summer or in to irrigate the land around the house, in each village and each city. You can calculate how much you can reserve in your from your rooftop in the ground. Water quality protection and improvement, we are working on that. Integrated water and land planning, economic incentive for reducing water and energy demand management, improvement in the water use efficiency, improve the climate data collection quality check for data monitoring and early warning system, raising the public awareness and behavior change for the people in different sector, building political will to address climate change, streaming climate expertise into water management, facilitating the use of climate data for planning and early warning system, enhance the fundraising capacity to finance relevant revolution. Thank you. And just I want to add, we have started implementing some project in Jordan funded by GCF and from different agency and donor regarding water harvesting and enhance awareness about the water harvesting from the roof surface, and especially in the south. It will be a big project for 7 years, and we will help people to drill wells and start aware people about the importance of the water and the climate change. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think our session is, I think the session is over because I think the next group needs to come. Thank you very much for staying on beyond your lunchtime, and I hope you've had a meaningful presentation. Maybe we can give a clap to the presenters. Okay, thank you very much.